Hey, weirdos. I'm Elena.
I'm Ash.
And this is Morbid.
It's Morbid.
And it's 2025. It's 2025.
Yeah, it's been 2025 for like a little
Has
bit,
it?
I think. Yeah,
Well,
like our last couple episodes, maybe. Like, we don't know.
I was going to say, it's a trend. I have no idea
Yeah.
where we are.
You know what? You know where I'm at.
Where are you at?
Yeah.
Do you know where I'm at?
I'm in a bad place.
Oh, no.
I'm in a bad place.
What place is this?
It's the place of I don't have any more of my frosted sugar cookie holiday creamer.
I am also in that place, so I commiserate.
That creamer from International Delight, if you're listening,
Please send us some.
help me get to a good place, because
They're gone.
they're gone. They're
Can't get 'em.
absolutely gone. And do you know what happened to me the other day, actually?
Oh, I have a feeling I know what happened to you because it might have happened to me as well.
Why I oughta. I ordered 2 on DoorDash, and I gave a nice little tip and everything, and I said, if not available, just refund me, because I
Yeah.
don't want some other bullshit.
No.
They didn't want to refund me, so the Dasher brought me 2 random ass fucking creamers.
That's happened to me before.
Which, like, they were International Delight, and actually I shouldn't complain because one of them is like Italian sweet cream.
Oh, I love a sweet cream.
That one's really
Yeah,
good. That one's
it's a
really
good one.
good. So I'm not super mad, but anyways, International Delight, please send me a whole entire stock of the frosted sugar cookie creamer.
And I second that, please.
Please,
we're
please, please,
we're a
please,
show
please.
that requires it.
Please.
I've only had 1 bottle of it because that's the only
That's
bottle
all
I've been
I
able to
had.
find this season.
Me too.
And it's making me upset. And, we got to shoot our shot here.
That's the thing.
We got to shoot it.
You miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. Wayne Gretzky, Michael Scott.
There you go.
I just officed.
Nailed it. I did just realize that this is going to come out after the holidays and maybe it won't be available at all.
No, they still have it. I'm sure they do.
Okay. I believe you.
What do they
trust
do
you.
with it?
I trust you.
Then they have the recipe.
Yeah, give me
I don't even care if it's in that fancy bottle. You can just send it to me
in a jug.
in a jug, please. In a vat, if you would.
Send it to me in a barrel.
Just please. Just please.
in a keg, if you will.
Send me a cow that makes that, and I'll milk him.
Send me a keg of the frosted sugar cookie.
I would keg stand that. I would do a keg stand on that.
That's horrifying.
One thing I never did is a keg stand.
Me neither.
Yeah, I mean,
I
everybody
know that.
knows
I was going to
that.
say, is that shocking?
I used to, but I
used
just
to.
didn't do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, anyways, I just really want that. My life is hard without it. Today I did the
My life is hard. With
my life is hard without it. I did this sweet cream today, and I made it through. It's only like 2:00.
We're really
though.
proud of you.
Thanks.
Everybody keep Ash in your thoughts.
It's hard. Thank you.
She's using sweet cream instead of frosted sugar.
Keep me in your thoughts. What am I gonna do?
Thoughts and prayers.
Thank you. Those are useful.
So to gain some much needed perspective, we're gonna shift. We're gonna shift into something that's honestly gonna shock you, I believe.
Oh.
Everyone listening.
Okay.
The case that I am covering today, I'm going to be covering the Blackout Ripper.
Oh, I haven't heard of this one.
His name is Gordon Cummins, and
That's so unassuming.
yeah, just Gordon.
I just always think of Gordon Ramsay.
Yeah,
he's very assuming.
He's pretty assuming, but
I always just think
Yeah.
idiot sandwich.
Yeah, he's definitely assuming. But this guy, I had heard of this case, but I didn't know the details. And when I looked further into it, I was like, whoa. So this happened after Jack the Ripper.
Okay.
Also happened over in Europe, though. And
Many rippers in Europe.
many rippers. We have a few over here, too, but these ones are rough. And the thing is, I hesitate to say any ripper is worse than the other because they're all fucking
you
terrible.
don't
That's
wanna-
why they are literally called rippers.
Yeah.
But the thing with the Blackout Ripper that we're going to cover today, this is going to be a 2-parter, by the way, because there's a lot. But he is like with Jack the Ripper. Sorry, I'm like everywhere. My thoughts are all over the place.
It's because you didn't have the right coffee creamer.
I didn't. That's very true. So Jack the Ripper was pretty methodical about the way he went about things. Seemed like he had almost like a plan,
like a blueprint,
when he went into each murder. He did it quick. He did it relatively, clean isn't the word, but like very quick and smooth. He also did his mutilation post-mortem for the most part. Really the only one that you can point to is Mary Kelly at the end that was like frenzied and out of control and totally off the map, which some people even wonder if it's, obviously we went into that, if that's all connected and all that, but we won't go into that. But the Blackout Ripper, Gordon Cummins, he's a mutilator. That's why he's called a Ripper.
Yeah.
But he is like sadistic because his mutilation is not done post-mortem.
Okay.
It seems like he enjoys hurting women, and he enjoys hurting women when they can feel it.
Like torturing them.
Yeah. He mutilates and tortures while they are alive. And it's so, well, I hesitate to say he is worse because obviously it is all awful.
Yeah.
He's different.
He's a different
for
brand
sure.
of
He's a
Ripper.
different level of Ripper, I would say. It's very upsetting. I'm giving you a trigger warning up front. This is very graphic, and there is a lot of really fucked up, gruesome things that he does to his victims. So please be aware of that.
Okay.
Good news is, though, they caught him.
That's good.
He's not a Jack the Ripper. He's a Gordon.
He's a Gordon. He got caught.
He's Gordon the idiot. So let's take it back, shall we? Let's take it back. We're going back into, when German bombing raids were happening during World War II.
That's far back.
Taking it back. We're in the 30s, late 30s, early 40s. So in response to the onset of German bombing raids during World War II, a lot of England's most vulnerable citizens were evacuated, and temporarily they were taken out of like the urban areas to be safer in the more rural parts of the country, because it was really, really dangerous time and very unprecedented and very like unpredictable time. Mm-hmm. But those who stayed in the cities would spend years enduring blackouts.
So scary.
And these were periods where the city was intentionally plunged into darkness to prevent German bombers from easily identifying urban areas to bomb.
That's so sad that they even had to do that to
Yes.
avoid being bombed.
Oh, and it's that in and of itself is an awful, awful thing. If you research into these blackouts, horrific. And they were a huge inconvenience and obviously like tough to deal with in a myriad of ways, but they were also a safety risk for everybody. But for at least one person, they offered the perfect opportunity to enact what was clearly his darkest fantasies. Oh. This man clearly had been thinking about this. You don't just go and do this. And he didn't have a criminal record.
Wow.
So he went straight. He must have been thinking about this for a long time. And this gave him the opportunity. So when the German army invaded Poland in September 1939, like we said, countries all over Europe were forced to take a position and develop a strategy just in case they were drawn into the conflict. In England, where attacks from Germany were kind of, everybody was just waiting for it. Mm-hmm. It was imminent, essentially. The war secretary just quickly mobilized the British armed forces and began evacuating 1.5 million citizens.
Wow.
Those citizens were mostly like women, children, the elderly, the most vulnerable, like I said. Taking them out of the cities, bringing them to the countryside. That's where they were going to be safer. But these would end up being super traumatic for a lot of people because they ended up being relocated to the homes of strangers often. And they also wouldn't know what happened to the people that they left behind.
Oh my God, I can't imagine.
Like fathers, brothers, all
all
husbands, all kinds of people. Yeah. And that was for like many years they dealt with this. Under those circumstances, when the bombs began falling a few months later, many of these people chose to just return home instead of being separated from their families and just dealt with the chaos that was about to ensue. Now, in addition to the relocation of honestly the most vulnerable people in the nation, the government also implemented those widespread nightly blackouts. It was every night.
Wow.
During this time, all lights, electric or natural, were to be extinguished.
Oh my God. That must have just
Straight
been
up blackness.
so scary.
I don't think any of us can truly appreciate
How dark that would be.
that was happening here, because we are, no matter what, there's lights around us at all times.
Always.
It's like when we covered Jack the Ripper, we talked about how I don't think people take into account how wild it is that he did what he did with such precision.
In that darkness.
In how dark it was. There wasn't street lamps. He was doing this by the light of a small flame up in a corner.
Right.
Like, that's insane.
And then here, there's no light whatsoever.
It is a black that you can't even conceive of.
Oh God. And that just adds to the feeling.
Oh
the
my God.
feeling.
Because it takes away all your
and-
senses. It totally, like, it puts you in a place of, like, just complete vulnerability.
Yeah,
in every way.
Imagine, like, there are so many people who have genuine, like, people say, "Oh, I'm scared of the dark," but there are people who have literal phobias of the dark. Can you imagine having to deal with that?
I don't think I feel like it would make me crazy.
Yeah, I feel
Not having any kind of, like, perception of what was around you. That's what would scare me the most.
that would fuck you up.
And it's not like this was something you could just, like, not do, because if you violated this blackout, you were going to be subject to fines of various amounts. And it was as simple as, like, lighting a match would get you a fine. Wow. And these people couldn't afford this stuff, and they couldn't afford to be thrown in jail.
And also, you don't want to be the person who
fucks it up.
Exactly, and, like, puts everybody in danger.
Yeah, and obviously this, like you said, like, you don't want to be the one to fuck this up, because what they were doing was trying to stay hidden from German bombers identifying them as targets during air raids. But while it was, like, strategically made sense for the time, because, like, what else are they going to do? It had obviously added risks with it. It's like, yeah, you are safe from air raids. You're not safe from each other.
Right.
And that's a problem. In the first month alone, traffic deaths doubled, and by January 1942, 1 in 5 people had sustained some form of injury from the blackouts.
1 in 5 people.
Now, as all this chaos was unfolding, the question that came about was, what do we do with the nation's countless prisoners that are now, unlike the free British citizens who could evacuate or hide during an air raid, people in prison and youth detention centers were just sitting targets. Right. It's like, what do? Do you just let them be sitting? Not all of them are in there for, like, killing people. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, this is some petty crimes are there.
Right.
And it's like they're just sitting there waiting to be bombed now. So in response, the government implemented a policy where any inmate with less than 3 months left on their sentence and boys who completed at least 6 months of their sentence would be released.
That's a little bit scary. You understand why that happened, but that's definitely a little scary.
Well, and the result was a massive, massive uptick in criminal activity at a time when law enforcement was already overworked and their attention was understandably in many other places. So during this period, police relied on support from civilian volunteers who were instrumental in coordinating air raid precaution efforts and could be identified now, like these volunteer citizens. They could be identified by their helmets and air raid precautions armband. So you could know who you could trust, quote unquote. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, as people are going to do, they're going to people. So petty criminals quickly realized those armbands gave the wearer considerable power. And according to an article by Duncan Campbell, criminals began to kit themselves out with an ARP warden's helmet and armband and smash their way into shops when no one was looking.
Yeah.
So they just started using it.
It's like Ted Bundy carrying around a police badge.
Exactly. Under the circumstances, law enforcement and the public had to make distinctions between what was and what wasn't behavior worth prosecuting, because they can't go after everybody now. In simple terms, stealing a blanket from a shop would ordinarily be considered theft. Mm-hmm. But during wartime, most people would probably agree with you that stealing a blanket from a shop to cover a body in the street was probably not criminal behavior.
Yeah, fair enough.
So lines were being blurred, which makes it very scary. Now, in wartime England, looting and shoplifting alone were such huge, massive problems that the court set aside 2 days each week just to prosecute those charged for those crimes.
Wow.
But they were not the only crimes that were clogging up the courts. The less scrupulous business owners, for example, were known to exploit the rationing of wartime goods by selling additional products at, like, crazy over, like, price gouging,
Yeah.
essentially. And even some doctors were more than happy to disqualify a young man from military service just for a few extra bucks.
Yeah.
So everybody's suddenly tilting in the wrong direction
Yeah.
on the moral scale here. With the British justice system just so bogged down with additional crime and a dramatic increase in public need, other crimes were kind of ignored. Like sex work, for example, was a big crime back then, considered a big crime, and it flourished during the wartime years. In part because it was obviously like way less important of like, who is it really? Like, what are we doing here? You know? But also because these women provided what some were arguing was a valuable service to the military men.
Yeah.
So what are you gotta prosecute them? Like, come on.
Just let everybody
There's
live.
a lot of way worse shit happening in here. In London's Piccadilly Circus, for example, the so-called Piccadilly Commandos, as the area's sex workers were known, catered to thousands of young men about to ship off the front lines, all of which went largely ignored by the police. They just let it happen. You know, they're going off to war. You might as
you
well.
know what? Whatever.
With that said, the lax attitudes around sex work at the time and law enforcement turning a blind eye to the whole thing allowed for at least one man to quickly and easily find victims with who he could get very close to very easily and act out his murderous fantasies that he had very clearly been having for a long time.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's a double-edged sword, for real.
Definitely.
Now, given the tensions and frustrations being felt across Britain in those days, murder seemed like an inevitable thing that was going to happen. In fact, within just 2 weeks of the announcements of the nightly blackouts, the report of the first murder came in from Edinburgh on September 15th, 1939. And this victim, in this case, 52-year-old Isabella Ralph, had no fixed address and did make her living sometimes doing sex work.
Okay.
Now, in the case of Isabella Ralph, the press reported the death and gave like a brief overview of the circumstances. That was really it. Just a quick little mention. You know, with cities being ripped apart by German air raids and families being separated by evacuations and displacement, it seemed like everyone just kind of moved on from this murder of this woman, this, you know, like nomadic woman in Scotland.
Right.
Fortunately, Edinburgh police got lucky, and a few days later, they arrested John Henry Connell, a 24-year-old bricklayer that was living in Edinburgh.
Damn, 24.
Yeah. Upon being arrested, Connell told police he'd taken a room at a boarding house, and the next day, he realized that he had some money that was stolen. So he confronted Isabella Ralph, with whom he'd had relations with the previous evening.
Okay.
And he managed to retrieve his stolen money. But in the process of this whole thing, the two got physically aggressive with each other. They started struggling. And he said he grabbed her throat in order to stop her from screaming. And oops, he killed her. I think we all know by now how long it takes to manually strangle someone.
Uh-huh.
So that's bullshit.
Yeah.
You don't just go, oh, I tried to make her stop screaming. It's so crazy. I held it there for like, you know, many, many minutes.
Yeah.
Like,
at the very least, it's 3 minutes, right?
At least like 4, I think
it 4?
it is. Yeah, and it's consistent pressure,
right?
Too. It's like if you
it's
let
not
off
just
even
making
for a second, it starts
scream.
the clock again.
Yeah.
Now, at trial, Connell's lawyer claimed his client had never intended to kill Isabella, and he had only wanted to get his stolen money back. Despite the evidence showing that several of Isabella Ralph's ribs had been crushed in the process, indicating a very much higher degree of violence than he was talking about, the judge accepted the lesser plea of culpable homicide and sentenced Connell to 3 years of penal servitude.
Wow.
In handing down this sentence, Lord Justice Clerk told him, "I am satisfied that the result of your conduct was the very last thing you anticipated, but you took this woman's life through violence, which you inflicted upon her." So he's like, I'm confident that you didn't mean to kill her, but you did. Essentially.
Okay.
Now, the murder of Isabella Ralph, which was definitely a violent homicide, like,
yes,
good try, illustrates two important things about the press and the judicial system's understanding of murder at the time, especially of the lower class persuasion during this time period. First, regardless of the brutality or sensational nature of the crime, page space was limited, and editorial and journalistic priorities were given to coverage of the war at the time. So they were just not going to focus on this. And second, the justice system, particularly the resources of the police and the court system, had very limited bandwidth and were eager to process what they considered lesser crimes as quickly and with as little attention as possible.
Right.
These two realities are definitely going to be an important factor in why there was relatively little coverage of what would end up being a serial killer operating in London during these blackouts, especially when you consider the obvious comparisons to none other than England's most notorious and mysterious killer, Jack the Ripper. There's a very obvious, you can compare them.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's like, it shows you how fucking bonkers it was at the time.
That they're not talking about like a Jack the Ripper 2.0.
A second Jack the Ripper, essentially, is kind of going unnoticed and not really talked about. It's like, that should have been like Jack the Ripper at the time was all anyone was talking about.
Yeah.
Literally all they were talking about. All the press was talking about. Anybody on the street. And this one, which is essentially the same like MO, but somehow more sadistic, is not even being talked about.
It's very interesting, and you and I have been talking about it lately, how certain social climates will just desensitize people
completely
to the worst things.
Yeah. It wasn't being reported on. Mm-hmm. Now, by the winter of 1942, the war had been dragging on for more than a year, and violence had honestly, for the residents of London, had just become a normal thing. They just dealt with it every day. Mm-hmm. Violence, violence, violence. Still, even the most hardened of Londoners would have been absolutely shocked by the first discovery. This discovery was made by plumbers William Baldwin and Harold Batchelder on their way to work on the morning of February 9th, 1942. So as the two men passed through Montague Place in Marylebone, I looked this up, Marylebone, that morning, they noticed what looked to be a broken flashlight laying in the snow just outside of one of these they're like basically handmade air raid shelters.
Okay.
If you look it up, it's like a little kind of a half circle, like a half sphere.
Tent.
Kind of made with it's kind of made with like a tin almost.
Ah.
With like a little opening so you can scoot in and hide, essentially. Okay. Next to it, they found a woman's green wool turban-style hat, some matches, and some Ovaltine tablets. Then, as they got closer to it, they saw what looked like the pale leg of what they believed was a mannequin sticking out of the doorway of the shelter.
It's never a mannequin.
Harold Batchelder ran to the nearest phone and called the police, and PC John Miles arrived a short time later. They discovered this was a human body. Mm-hmm. Because initially they thought it was a mannequin, but they were like, let's call it in.
Yeah, just in case.
With all like the objects that clearly belong to a woman, we're not going to check ourselves. So upon seeing this woman's body, Miles knew it was not an accidental death.
Yeah.
So he called for additional officers and he secured the scene. Now, as far as the officers at the scene could tell, the woman in the air raid shelter had been brutalized by her attacker. Her face and neck were badly bruised. Her clothes were torn, her skirt had been pulled up to her thighs, and she had been violently sexually assaulted. Oh. The following day, the pathologist, Sir Bernard Spilsbury. I love this man. Sir Bernard Spilsbury.
It's a very important name.
It is an important name. He concluded his postmortem examination, and he reported that aside from the bruising on her face and neck, there were, quote, a number of small abrasions to her upper, including a small amount of abrasions to her exposed right breast.
Oh.
The cause of death was listed as manual strangulation.
Okay.
She ended up being the least brutalized of all of his victims, if you can believe it. Just to give you a heads up for what's to come. At the scene, there was very little forensic evidence to work with. Investigators theorized that her body, which had been discovered, quote, with her legs wide open in the doorway of the shelter, had been deliberately posed to humiliate her corpse. Yeah. Later that day, PC Miles found the victim's purse a short distance away on the sidewalk. Someone had clearly gone through it and taken whatever money and valuables were inside, as well as her ID card.
Okay.
The only blood found on the victim was her own, but the bruising on her neck and fingerprints found at the scene suggested that she'd been killed by a left-handed person.
Ah, interesting that they could figure that out back in the 30s.
Isn't that interesting? A few days later, the victim was identified as Evelyn Hamilton, a 41-year-old pharmacist from Essex. The outbreak of the war had all but bankrupted the pharmacy where Evelyn was working, and on the night of her death, she had been passing through London on her way to Grimsby, where she was going to start a new job at a different pharmacy.
Oh,
so she was just going to her job.
Right.
Detectives learned that Hamilton had been staying at a local women's hostel that evening and was last seen at the Lions Corner house, where she had dinner and a drink. But unfortunately, no one at the Lions Corner remembered whether she was joined by a man that evening, so they couldn't really determine whether she'd been lured to the shelter or simply attacked on her way back from the hospital or the hostel. Detectives had only just begun investigating the Hamilton murder when a report of a similar murder was reported on February 10th. This is just the next day.
Right.
That morning, 2 meter readers from the electric company were doing their rounds, just going from rooming house to rooming house. And they were trying to go into one place in a rooming house on Wardour Street in Soho. So the men knocked on the door of 34-year-old Evan Oatley's room, and they got no reply. The manager was like, no, she's home. Like, I know this. I saw her. Like, she hasn't left. So the manager was like, you know what? Did you try the door? And they were like, well, no, we can't just like walk into people's houses. So we didn't. And he was like, no, I know she's home. I'm just going to like see if I can open it and yell for her.
Yeah.
So he jiggled the door and it was unlocked.
Yeah.
So he kind of like opened it a little, kind of yelled her name, didn't get an answer. And he was like, I know she's home. Like, what the fuck? She wouldn't leave this unlocked. So they ended up going inside. And as they entered the apartment, they found Evelyn lying face up on her bed. They later said they believed she had a red scarf around her neck, but found out it was just that her neck had been violently slashed open.
Wow.
Yeah. The men ran into the street to find the nearest police officer and returned with Inspector John Hennessy. In his report filed later that day, Hennessy described what he saw when he entered the apartment. This is rough. I flashed my torch and saw a woman believed to be Evelyn Oatley on her back on a divan or single bed in a transverse position. We looked it up, in a divan. I didn't know what that was.
No, me either.
Is apparently like a chaise lounge, essentially. Her head was pointing north and was hanging down the side of the bed. Oh. She was naked except for a slender garment which covered her breasts. I saw that her throat had been cut and a hand torch was wedged in her private parts. A tin can opener was lying near the torch, and her legs were wide apart.
Oh, my God.
It gets worse. Additional investigators arrived at the house soon after the discovery and were shocked by the brutality of this murder. Superintendent Fred Sherrill said she was a ghastly sight. She had been the victim of a sadistic attack of the most horrible and revolting kind.
Yeah.
Now, Superintendent Fred Sherrill is kind of like a fingerprint expert as well.
Oh, wow.
So he was like really big in this case, and even he couldn't, he was the one that determined that they were probably this person was probably left-handed, and tried to run these fingerprints alongside like known offenders and couldn't find a match anywhere. He's the one that determined.
Person wasn't known.
Yeah. Things that had been used in this murder and on Evelyn were a razor blade, a can opener, parts of a broken mirror, a flashlight, and curling tongs.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It's literally unthinkable rage and sadism in this case. That's why I was saying that there's a different element here than there was in Jack the Ripper case.
Yeah.
Not
there's a
worse
torture
per
element.
se, but it's a different level for sure.
Curling tongs?
Yeah. It's sadism, and it appears to be that the killer is taking a lot of time to torture and inflict pain and mutilations on these victims while they are alive.
Yeah.
Like the Hamilton murder, there was very little evidence found at the scene, and no one could think of any reason that someone would kill Oatley. At the time of her death, Evelyn was married, but had been living apart from her husband Harold for some time while she pursued an acting career in London. According to Harold Oatley, Evelyn was, quote, fascinated with West End life and would not leave it. But while it was true that she was hoping to make her way in the theater, she had worked at a nightclub for a little while, but while her husband was away, she had been supporting herself as a full-time sex worker since 1939. The last time anyone had seen her was when she was with a dark-haired airman the night before. This dark-haired airman had approached her, somebody said.
Okay.
And according to this really cool YouTuber who he's fascinating. His channel, he's called Well, I Never.
Well,
on
I
YouTube.
never.
And he's just this British man who'll tell you all about these amazing things and horrifying things.
Love it.
Apparently her friends, and this like really will like break your heart when he said it. Her friends later said she had turned to sex work, you know, obviously for income while her husband was away, but also because she was afraid of sleeping in her apartment alone because of the blackouts. So like she just wanted
That's so sad. She was just
company.
lonely and
Yeah.
scared.
It's like really sad. According to the medical examiner, Evelyn Oatley had been, quote, beaten and strangled to unconsciousness and then suffered extensive sexually motivated mutilations inflicted by the killer using a safety razor, curling tongs, a corner fragment of a broken mirror, and the tin can opener.
Yeah.
Evelyn's cause of death was the 5.5-inch wound on her neck that severed her carotid artery, which was believed to have been inflicted with the 2-inch razor blade.
Right.
Now, among the evidence that was found in the room were unidentified fingerprints on the fragment of the broken mirror and the tin can opener, and they again indicated that the killer was left-handed.
So we're relating these two cases.
Even though they were very different, but,
Yeah.
you know, otherwise it looked like there was, you know, obviously a huge struggle, but that there was also only one thing missing. And it was like a silver cigarette case that was in her purse.
Just a trophy.
But her bank books and her money were still there. Now, that makes me think that in the first case, the Hamilton murder, they said they found her purse close by, but on the sidewalk, and that I think somebody passing by just stole her shit.
Possibly, yeah.
I don't even know if he did. He
My
maybe took
thought-
her identification, but I don't know if he took her money.
My thought was that possibly he like chased her somehow and she dropped her purse along the way. And then, like you said, somebody else took her stuff.
I think someone else
And
probably did.
I do wonder if, like, obviously there's such an escalation here, if he didn't do everything that he did to his second victim, to his first victim, because it was a little bit more, like, in this case, he's in an apartment tucked away. He has all the time in the world.
Yeah, and it doesn't look like he brings these things with him.
Yeah.
It looks like he finds them where he is.
Oh,
and
okay,
he
so
was
they just weren't
outside
available at the
this
first
thing.
crime
So I think he
scene.
just didn't have anything available to him. I think if he did, it probably would have been the exact same thing.
Yeah.
But it was outside. Yeah. What's even worse is a neighbor told police later that a little after midnight the night before, they had heard a radio suddenly turn up really loud from that apartment, enough that they could hear it through the walls.
We always say how much we hate that.
Fucking hate that.
I know.
He literally was doing it to drown out her screams.
Yeah.
Now, on February 12th, a sex worker named Catherine Mulcahy nearly lost her life to this man, but
Oh,
didn't.
God. She got away?
Yes. Apparently, a very nice-looking, clean-cut man approached her while she was soliciting on Regent Street, and she agreed to work with him. Once they were at her apartment and the whole thing began, he got on top of her and attacked her immediately. He dug his knees as hard as he could into her abdomen and started trying to strangle her manually, but she fought back hard. And apparently she still had her boots on, and she kicked him as hard as she could off of her and ran the fuck out of there to her neighbors completely nude.
Oh.
He ran after her and threw money at her, claiming he was drunk and he didn't mean to, and then he ran away.
Yeah, sure.
But he left something behind.
What?
He left a belt behind. A Royal Air Force belt,
So
specifically.
this motherfucker's in the Air Force?
And remember, the night before, Evelyn
An
had been
airman.
seen being approached by a nice, clean-cut, dark-haired Air Forceman.
Isn't it so scary how, like,
can't trust
somebody
anyone.
can look so unassuming and even
Yeah.
charming, and then they're this.
And then they're
They're
this.
this. Oh, scary.
Yeah. Now, he went right on that evening to kill again after this, what he would consider a failure. But that victim would not be discovered until February 13th. So we're going to get there, but I'm trying to go in order of the discoveries while making maintaining the timeline.
Okay.
Because I want you to get the idea of how bloodthirsty this fucker really was. Like, he
Right.
barely went a day, sometimes even hours between murders. It was like a spree. And when one failed, he would immediately find another woman to kill. So he does go right to another one, but she is not found for a couple of days.
Okay.
So the police and press had honestly barely begun to even process Evelyn Oatley's scene when a report of yet another body came in not 24 hours later. On the afternoon of the 13th, 15-year-old, and it's not her who
thank
died,
goodness.
15-year-old Barbara Lowe went to visit her mother, Margaret, at her apartment in North Soho.
Oh, it's her mom, though.
Yeah. When Barbara's knocks didn't get an answer, she asked a neighbor if they'd seen her mother, Margaret. But the neighbor was like, you know what? I haven't seen her in a couple of days. And there is a package that's been sitting on the step for a couple of days. Oh. So it was not her mom's character to go away without saying anything or to like just abandon her in any way. So Barbara called the police, who dispatched an officer to the apartment. They used a spare key and were able to get inside. But when they went inside, D.S. Leonard Blacktop was very surprised to see that the blackout curtains were still drawn and everything was completely dark. And he was like, are you sure she's in here? And he switched on his flashlight and started making his way through the place. And in the kitchen, he saw a woman's purse was laying on the floor and everything in the purse was strewn across the floor.
Okay.
So finally, he reached the last door in the apartment, which was Margaret's bedroom. The door was locked, but Barbara gave the detective permission to force the door open so they could get inside. Fortunately, he was able to stop Barbara from coming into the room, which spared her a lot of horror. Margaret Lowe's body was on the bed, completely nude, and having probably been there for at least a day or two. Her face and head were brutally beaten, and beaten with what the detective assumed was the fireplace poker that lay in two pieces on the floor beside her. It broke.
A fireplace poker.
Yeah.
Those things are usually like wrought iron.
Yeah. Later, the autopsy would show that her jaw had been shattered by the blows. One of her stockings had been tied tightly around her neck and knotted. It had dug into her skin. And her body had been badly, badly mutilated. With, among other things, a razor, a potato peeler, and a table knife. And this is horrifying, not that everything else hasn't been, there was a large serrated bread knife protruding from a wound near her groin, and a wax candle had been inserted into her vagina. Yeah, everybody is literally in this room in a state of absolute shock. It's that when I tell you that I was not ready for this case to be as brutal as it is, I had no idea.
I don't know if we've heard anything that brutal back to back.
The fact that this has gone largely kind of like under the radar even now.
Yeah.
Like I've said we're going to cover the Blackout Ripper to a couple people and they're like, oh, what's that?
Yeah, I know. I've literally never heard of it.
You had never heard of it? Nobody had ever heard of it. And this is what it is. A potato peeler.
That I couldn't move. That's the thing somehow that I was focused on.
Because he's using just kitchen items.
Oh, God.
Like he's just using what is around.
This is brutal.
Which is even more fucked up. That this man is coming in. He knows he can strangle them to death. So he's not worried about... He doesn't seem to be worried about like the end result. Right. He knows he can probably get the end result. But he's just coming in there being like, I'll just use what's around. Like potato peeler, razor, fucking candle.
I can't even begin to think
can
what
opener,
you would do with
broken
a potato
mirror
peeler to somebody.
Like,
oh my God.
Yeah.
That poor woman. Thank God her daughter didn't see that.
That's the thing. That's the thing.
I don't know how you would ever go on.
No,
even
I don't
just
think you do.
Hearing what had happened to her mother to like, oh my God.
Like, how do you even?
I'm speechless right
15.
now. That's the other thing. 15 in the middle of the war, like motherless.
Yeah. And her mom had been like, just trying to make ends, like just trying to and keep her in boarding school too. Like pay to keep her in boarding school. Because fingerprints were found in the apartment and again, left-handed. So they're connecting it now.
Yep.
But that wasn't, and obviously she had some commonalities with the other victims. But until the early 1930s, Margaret and her husband had been relatively wealthy, living off an income from the dry goods store and boarding house that they had owned together. But her husband died in 1932, and the income quickly went away. And Margaret found herself desperate to support herself and her daughter, so she turned to sex work. This was not, and again, her daughter was going to boarding school, and she wanted to keep her in boarding school. So she did this to keep her daughter where she was safest.
Yeah.
Now, this was not the first time that she'd relied on sex work for income, but she was kind of hoping to have left it behind when she met her husband and like started a family.
Yeah.
And she did until he died.
Right.
Which is really just like, I feel so bad because like, she didn't want to.
No.
Now, the similarities between the victims weren't lost on the press. One reporter wrote, "The 3 West End murders have all been discovered within an area of just over 1 square mile. As each woman was strangled, the possibility that all 3 were the victims of the same person cannot be ruled out." There were, of course, other details about the cases that the press hadn't even been aware of at the time, and it probably would have only strengthened their belief that the women were victims of the same man. But there was really not a lot of time to consider all the connections between the cases, because another victim was discovered just hours after Margaret Lowe's body had been found.
My God, I can't imagine the police just going from scene to scene like this.
Yeah, just one after the other after the other.
Yeah.
And that's where we're going to end part 1, just because I think there's a lot in here and it's very heavy.
Seriously.
But this is, I mean, luckily, he gets caught.
He will get caught.
It's shocking when he's caught because he's not like he's not a walking monster on the outside.
I mean, he's obviously good looking enough to have charmed these women, normal looking enough and normal seeming enough to
that no one's batting an eye.
And he's in the Air Force. Like, he had to have passed some kind of, well, I don't know how that worked back then, actually.
I don't either.
I know now you have to pass so many tests to be cleared to be part of the military.
I think you still needed to pass
I was going to say
tests, so it's like,
so he passed some of those tests and it's like, geez Louise.
It's just the Jack the Ripper case is so brutal and like so vicious, and like it's shocking when you go through it bit by bit and find out the injuries to these women. And then like this is just like, because you can't help but compare the two because they're in the same relative corner of the world.
Sure.
Not like too far away in time from each other.
Same like victim
and it's the
profile,
same kind of victim profile. It's the same
motive,
almost like frenzy when it comes to like how quickly and how many victims he was ranking up here.
Right.
But it's like there's just like he has to be such an evil fuck.
Yeah.
Like he has to be such an evil
to use a potato peeler on somebody, to stab somebody with a bread knife, to kill anybody, obviously, but the lengths that he's going to, and like, sexually assaulting them with these objects. And oh my God, I think this is definitely up there with some of the most brutal cases that you have covered.
I agree. I was shocked.
I am shocked right now. I think it's good that we're ending here for part 1, because I think, oh damn, should we bring back palate cleansers?
I know, seriously.
I think everybody needs a quick palate cleanser, so go listen to the rewatcher for that.
Yeah, and part 2, there's more. He's not done. So part 2 is not, just the arrest and all that. He's not done.
Right.
And he's as brutal.
I'm very excited to hear the part where he gets caught and sentenced to so many years in prison. Yeah. I hope all the years.
All the years. Hope he's still there.
Yeah. Well, fuck.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks for listening.
And we hope you
keep
it
weird. Oh, but not so weird I'm so shocked that I can't actually even speak right now. Yeah, she was
just like, am I supposed to say something?
Not that weird.
No, not that weird.
Never that. We don't have to tell you that.
No,